It's no secret that Disney and Pixar have been struggling lately, at least when it comes to making great blockbuster films. The pandemic screwed them over, along with most movie studios, but even after the restrictions have been lifted, their movies still struggled, with some of them losing the company millions of dollars. In times like this, Disney and Pixar need a massive W in the box office, and they place their hopes on that with Inside Out 2. After spending millions on relentlessly advertising it, it looks like their strategy has paid off. As of writing this video, Inside Out 2 has the biggest film opening weekend in Pixar's history, grossing nearly $300 million worldwide. So without a doubt, Disney and Pixar are celebrating their success with this film. And you know what? For the first time in a while, I genuinely believe that Inside Out 2 is a movie that earned the amount of success in the box office. Despite all my criticisms towards Disney lately for many of their decisions, I cannot lie about this. Pixar did an excellent job with this movie, which is impressive. Before going into the theater, my expectations were somewhat high, admittedly, after hearing the initial thoughts from people who have seen the movie before me. Against all odds, the movie actually slightly surpassed my expectations. Right now, it's my favorite Pixar movie in the 2020s. And it's probably my favorite non-Toy Story sequel from Pixar so far. So if you're expecting me to talk about how Inside Out 2 is just a low-effort cash grab from Disney, and how it's an unnecessary sequel that ruined the original film, you're not getting that today. Pixar delivered to make Inside Out 2 an excellent movie that somehow justifies its own existence and success. I guess the question is, how did they do it? And what does that say about my previous comments on Pixar? Are sequels actually the right path for the studio moving forward in order to be successful? So, with the movie itself, justifying a sequel to the original Inside Out is surprisingly easier than I would have expected. Unlike with some of the other Pixar sequels like Finding Dory and Incredibles 2, where they felt a bit forced story-wise, Inside Out 2 felt like a natural progression for the story of Riley's mind. We all know the human mind changes a lot, and there's just so much stuff going on within the mind, and all of that can be used to make a new story that is just as impactful to people like how the original movie was. The first movie focused on Riley's mind as a child and how her mind adapts to moving to a new city. So naturally, the next major step for any human mind development is puberty. Now, puberty is a topic that Pixar has talked about before, with Turning Red being the most notable example. However, while that movie focused more on the physical changes and how it affects relations between the main character and their family, Inside Out 2 specifically focuses on how the mind is affected by puberty and how those changes affect one's decision making. So we see things like intense emotional mood swings, the desire to be independent from parents, and the drive to change themselves to be more mature. I don't want to admit this because it goes against what I said before in a previous video, but I do think Inside Out 2 illustrated puberty better in my view. You can argue that Turning Red's more personal approach with its story makes it more relatable for certain people like teenage girls, which is a big demographic for sure, but as someone who's not in that demographic, I do think Inside Out illustrated puberty in a way that nearly anyone can relate to. I mean, everyone goes through mental turmoil during puberty, and one of the major changes that Riley got is getting new emotions to mess with her. That leads me to the next thing that I really liked about this movie a lot more than I thought: the new emotions: anxiety, envy, ennui, and embarrassment. When I heard there were going to be 4 new emotions at first, I was concerned by that. I thought introducing new emotions would break some of the logic of how emotions worked in the first movie. I mean, anxiety and embarrassment seem to basically do similar jobs that fear and disgust used to do, like figuring out worst case scenarios and avoiding social situations that can make you a social outcast. Also, I thought introducing new emotions would mean less screen time and character interactions among the characters that we already knew. After seeing the movie, I do think the new emotions did break that logic set in the first film, and the original 5 emotions did get less screen time because of it. However, I think those compromises were worth it because these 4 new emotions turned out to be really good characters on their own. Each of them had a distinct arc in the movie, which I'll talk more about later, and each of them showed how they can influence Riley in ways we never saw before in the original film. Adding new characters to an established story has a bit of a risk, and in the case of Inside Out 2, that risk paid off, And I think the addition of the new characters only work because of the addition of a new mind mechanic we learned about in this film, the belief system. When I first watched the film, I was actually a little confused by it, specifically how it's any different from the Islands of Personality. As a result, I sort of viewed it as nothing more than just another MacGuffin for Riley's emotions to fix, and thought the writers made it only to avoid using the core memories as the heart of the conflict again. But after thinking about it more and seeing the movie again to understand the system a bit better, I can see why this movie needed this mind mechanic in order for the story to work. The Islands of Personality determine what Riley's interests are and what she prioritizes, like her friendships, family, hockey, honesty, and goofiness. The belief system, on the other hand, determines how Riley views herself based on the memories that she remembers through her stream of consciousness. These views or beliefs form her sense of self, which is how the movie puts it, by the way. It's the bedrock for Riley's decision making in certain scenarios. Since Riley has this system, she does act more independently from her emotions compared to the first movie. She's presented more as a full-on character, with her own story arc of making her own decisions, trying to control her own emotions, and figuring out her own beliefs. She's basically more than just a platform for the emotions to show their story, which was the case for the first film. So compared to the first movie, Inside Out 2 shows more scenes of the outside world beyond the mind. Or at least that's how it feels anyway. I don't know the actual percentage between screen time of the mind and the outside world. But given how we already know a lot about Riley's mind before going into the movie, assuming if you watched the first movie anyway, it's a reasonable assumption to make that we see Riley more from the outside and we see her interact with other people. That being said, with the scenes that do take place in the mind, the animators did a phenomenal job in making sure it looks excellent. It's no surprise that Pixar's animation is top-notch in the realm of computer 3D animation. I mean, they are the pioneers of that medium of storytelling. But over the years, most animation studios have caught up in terms of quality. And this resulted in Pixar's animation style looking a bit less unique in the modern era. To spice things up, some scenes in this movie actually included a mix of different animation styles, some of which literally combines the 2D style of animation with the 3D style. To be clear, this isn't something inherently new for Pixar. I mean, even the first Inside Out included a mixture of animation styles. But this movie just takes it a little bit further than before, with 3D characters like Joy interacting with 2D animated objects. In addition to using different art styles, we also got a good chunk of Easter eggs and visual gags. Again, nothing inherently new for Pixar, but it's cool to see nonetheless. You know what's also great? The characters themselves. Visually, they look as great as ever, given that Pixar doesn't like to skimp on animation quality. Thankfully, unlike with a few of their films, they also did not skimp out on the writing of these characters as well. With so many major characters on screen now, it's rather surprising how each of them kind of have their own story arc. After being kicked out from headquarters, fear, anger, and disgust were very critical of Joy, but they eventually learned to have faith in her. Sadness acts more independently without much guidance from the other emotions. Embarrassment goes from being a helper of anxiety and tries to combat against her goals and changing Riley by helping out the original 5 emotions. Ennui and envy didn't really have much of an arc, admittedly, but even so, they still had their moments where they showed off what makes them unique in a comedic sense. That leads me to Joy and Anxiety, who have the most important arcs in this movie. Despite the lessons she learned from the first movie, Joy continues to dominate how things work in headquarters and often pushes others and Riley around. However, this drive is perpetuated by the fact that Joy is afraid of Riley essentially outgrowing her. When Anxiety shows up and takes over headquarters by force, Joy went through what's referred to as a negative growth arc. Anyone who has seen shows like The Owl House or Amphibia probably knows what I'm referring to. Basically, it's when a character starts out in a relatively good spot, but after major tragedies and setbacks to overcome those problems, they essentially lose faith in themselves at their lowest point. But towards the end of the story, they reconcile with their flaws and acknowledge there is still a place for them in the world they live in. That's the kind of arc that Joy went through, and the catalyst of this arc was Anxiety, who is, safe to say, an actual antagonist, which was something that was missing from the first movie actually. Although she's definitely not a villain. Her actions caused a lot of damage, but she still had good intentions. After all, Her job is to protect Riley from the stuff she can't see. Anxiety's arc is a prime example of too much of anything will be bad for you. And in a way, it's kind of similar to Joy's arc in the first movie, but she takes it one step further by intentionally removing the emotions that are blocking her end goal. Over the course of the film, Anxiety's influence over Riley becomes stronger and stronger, with the rest of the emotions either unable to stop her or join in her plan to change Riley too quickly. Eventually, Anxiety's control over Riley becomes so strong that even when she physically lets go of the console, Riley continues to be in a self-perpetuating anxiety attack. Now, this scene alone has so much for me to talk about that I have a separate video where I break down, well, Riley's breakdown. So be sure to subscribe if you want to see that. But what I will say for now is this scene really is Pixar at its best. Anxiety attacks are nothing inherently new for animated movies, but Pixar really went out of their way to make sure it is accurately portrayed from the outsider's perspective, and they managed to turn it into a story itself. The attention to detail of this scene itself, from the cinematography to the sequence of events, really makes you feel that moment as if you're Riley. The best thing about this scene is that it works well in both the context of how the mind works in the movie and how the human mind and body works in real life. So without a doubt, this scene definitely hit me quite hard, especially as someone who actually experienced a few anxiety attacks at some point in my life. Again, I'll save most of my thoughts on that scene for a later video, but yeah, this scene is definitely one of Pixar's best, and it stands apart from other memorable scenes in my view. There are a few more other minor things that I appreciate from this movie. The music score for this film is as great as ever. The comedic moments from this movie were well executed and timed. I also like how the movie takes general expressions and makes them literal in the context of the mind. I can go on, but I made it clear to you guys who are still watching that I really love this film. But are there any flaws with it? Well, no movie is perfect, and Inside Out 2 is no exception, of course. Like I said earlier, I don't like how this movie had to break certain rules and movie logic that the first movie established to make the sequel work. It's definitely a trade-off that paid off in my view, but I can understand why some people out there may be turned off by it. In addition, I don't like how we don't really see the new emotions in other people's heads. We know they do exist in other people's minds. I mean, we see Riley's parents have anxiety in their heads, but we didn't see those emotions in heads like Riley's friends or Val. Also, it would have been cool to see the inside of other people's heads more. I mean, the end credit sequence of the first Inside Out movie did that. Why not in the sequel? I guess it wasn't in the budget or something, I don't know. But ironically enough, I think the biggest problem with this movie is actually its own success. I know I said before that Inside Out 2 is one of the first Disney Pixar films in a very long time that deserved to be as successful as it is, but what I'm worried about is the precedent this sets. We know that Disney's strategy moving forward is focusing on making quality over quantity, and they're doing this by cutting their original films and focusing mostly on sequels and spin-offs. Inside Out 2 is the first film of this renewed push from Disney to make more sequels, and the fact that this strategy is working so far doesn't give me much hopes that Disney will focus a lot on their original movies anytime soon. At this point, I'm just hoping that Disney doesn't have the wrong takeaway here. The reason why Inside Out 2 is as successful as it is right now in most metrics is not because of the brand itself. As much as I like the franchise, I would not say that Riley's emotions are big pop culture icons compared to the likes of Woody and Buzz from Toy Story or the Minions from Despicable Me. The only reason why this franchise is as popular as it is right now is because of Disney's relentless bombardment of ads promoting this movie, and the fact that both movies so far are just amazing films to watch regardless of what demographic you're in. I hope that Disney acknowledges that, because I don't want a franchise to fall into decay like what we have seen with other movie and show franchises. That said, if Disney does take away the right lesson from this success and acknowledges that great stories combined with relentless marketing is key, then I would be more than happy to see new stories from this world again. If they go ahead in making a spin-off series, or hell, a third movie where Riley enters college and adulthood or something, I'm more than willing to give that a watch. What Inside Out 2 proved to me is that there is potential for this franchise to expand, and Pixar are still more than capable at smashing box office records. Would have I preferred if they achieved this with an original film like Soul or Turning Red? Kind of, yeah. But I'm glad that Pixar still achieved it by taking risks and making something extraordinary, which is what Inside Out 2 is. Now, of course, these are just some of my thoughts on this movie. Let me know what you guys think of Inside Out 2 in the comments below. Also, if you want to hear more of my ramblings on this movie, consider giving this video a like and subscribe for more content like this. With all that being said, thank you all for watching this video. I hope you all have a great day. See you in the next one.